All right, welcome back to Doomer Optimism. It's Tornado Nate again. More food and farm content today. I've been, trajectory here of trying to explain kind of ever since we've kind of had this disruption, this kind of beef war, I tend to call it. I've been really trying to talk to people involved in all aspects of meat production, from farmers, but also including processors. We've talked a lot about the big four packers. Well, if we want an alternative to the big four, we need to really think about what that looks like and what the challenges people face and how people do it when they're able to succeed. And so in that vein, today I'm going to talk to Greg Gunthorp. He is an Indiana hog farmer and also solar grazer, and just a wealth of knowledge on this topic. So I'm real excited to be able to have the opportunity to pick your brain here today and share with our listeners just sort of more depth about what really goes into. I think we'll probably hone in on the processing side of things today, but I would also like to hear more, and I'm very curious why I at least have to dedicate a little time to the solar grazing, because I'm a huge ruminant fan. So at any rate, Greg, welcome. And how are you doing today?
Welcome, Nate. Doing pretty good. It's a little chilly and a little windy out here in Northeast Indiana today, but it's nice ground batch feed this morning already. Got some more feed to grind when we're done here.
Nice. Yeah, it's cold here too. We had a warm up and it melted. We had a bunch of snow. It melted all the snow, but it's cold again today with that really biting prairie wind that comes around here. That's like, ugh. It's my least favorite weather to be outside in. I don't mind cold weather, but when that wind gets going, it's brutal.
Yeah, it's actually nice in the winter if it's at, high teens and the sun shining and no wind. Man, the sun doesn't come out and the wind blows. It can get pretty chilly out there.
Yeah, that's some of my favorite weather at all, really. Like a 20-degree winter day when it's clear and calm is about as nice as weather gets, really.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
So why don't we've talked before here on the show, but it's been a while, and to kind of orient towards this conversation, if you don't mind kind of just giving a little background on your farm and kind of specifically how you made the decision to get into processing your own animals, because you have a USDA plant on farm, and just I really want to kind of start from there and kind of hear about that.
Sure, I'll give you the short version of our story. I grew up about a mile and a half from here on a 600-acre diversified crop and livestock farm. My dad and brother still farm that, and I really enjoyed pigs. We had pastured pigs growing up, sold live onto the commodity market, and I got the opportunity. And this is going to become relevant later, but I got the opportunity when I graduated from high school through the FFA to become an exchange student to the United Kingdom. I spent 11 weeks in England and Scotland on 11 different family farms, plus a week at the Royal Highland Fair.
Wow.
Yeah. Two of the farms I stayed on were making a living direct marketing in 1988 in Europe. That was, I don't know about normal, but it was starting to become trendy already, in Europe. And I thought it was actually crazy. I think I sent a letter home to mom telling her that. She probably still has the letter. But, come back home. I went to the land grant university, got a degree in agricultural economics. Come home, going to be a pig farmer for the rest of my life. But that was the, early 90s. And, anybody that raises pigs knows that that was a time of massive consolidation in the hog industry. And in 1994, the hog market dipped, and Dad said that the hog market was done for the small independent, especially the small independent like us that raise pigs seasonally, didn't have, white pigs that were, the same number of them every single week for the whole year. Couldn't get a contract with the Packers. Said the market was done for the small independent. And I said, I want to raise pigs. So my wife and I went off on our own, bought my parents' breeding stock, started raising pigs. Less than 4 years later, 1998, my wife and I sold live pigs for less than what my grandpa sold them for in the Depression. Being on the northeast side of the Corn Belt, Thornapple Valley in Detroit had closed. Not all of our pigs, but a sizable portion of our pigs were either going to Thornapple Valley. The remainder were either going to the Tyson plant at Logansport or to Delphi. But the ones going to Thornapple Valley when it closed, there was not enough packers over on this side of the Corn Belt. So we got as low as 8 cents a pound minus the trucking to send them to Dubuque, Iowa. And so we netted as low as 5 cents a pound for live pigs. Lost every bit of equity that we had. And once again, though, I said I didn't want to quit raising pigs, and I remembered back to that venture in Europe 10 years earlier and said, we can eke out a living if we would get our pigs processed and sell them to restaurants in the big city. If you remember back to that time frame, you could just occasionally pick up a magazine where guys like Bill Nyman were starting to sell to Alice Waters at Shape and Ease. John Jameson on the other coast was starting to sell into like the Watergate and to a few places in New York. And, I told my wife that, hey, I think this thing will happen in the United States. I don't think it'll ever happen to the level that it did in Europe, but I think this thing will happen and we can eke out a living. I think there were two people on the planet didn't think I was absolutely batshit crazy. That was my wife and my sister. I think everyone else, because farm to table wasn't a thing in 1998. But with a little bit of luck and a little bit of fate, I believe, we sold our first dressed pig to Charlie Trotter in Chicago. And anybody that's a foodie knows that Charlie Trotter was one of the nicest restaurants in the world at the time. In fact, Wine Spectator magazine, that same month that we sold him a pig, rated Charlie Trotter the #1 restaurant in the world for food and wine. So we started at the top. And when you're selling pigs to Charlie Trotter and the farm to table movement gained some traction, you could get chefs to listen to you. And it grew and it grew fast. And had we filled out the paperwork in 2011, we would have made the Inc. 5,000 list because we were doubling every year there for a while. Farm to table got really, really trendy. I always have to follow that up with farm to table is nowhere near as trendy for the little guys nowadays. We woke the big guys up. Most of the farm to table comes from fancy brands from the big guys now. And I couldn't put enough sales guys on the road now to do that doubling every year if we tried. It just plain wouldn't be possible. We're not convenient enough. Our costs are at a point that it just doesn't as easily fit into the wholesale model. I would say that my experience in wholesaling is much more similar to what Mike Calicrate's is rather than what Jason's was. We really struggle. It's, don't get me wrong, we still fit into the wholesale model somewhat. We have product that served at Disney. We have product that served at in the north end of the casino at Caesar's Palace in the food court. We have product at O'Hare Airport. So we've been really, really fortunate. But primarily, we were food service suppliers within our region. If you look at a dot on the map, our farm is just about centrally located between Chicago, Detroit, and Indianapolis. And for 20-some years, we've run delivery routes into those areas, primarily to food service, to restaurants. And we've had to flex and change over the years, that wholesale, there got to be a lot more noise. There got to be a lot more competition in that 2015. We expanded our region. I would definitely not recommend anybody be a food service supplier going into a COVID pandemic. We had to flex in that. We sell a lot more product now that is white labeled or supplying other farmers that sell product elsewhere. We do fully cooked product that goes into food service that other farmers and other brands aren't easily able to do because we do specific restaurants or specific customers. So we flexed a lot. We've been very agile, and it's been an amazing, amazing journey. So back to your original question, we have a family farm in Northeast Indiana. We raise pastured pigs. We raise a little bit of pastured poultry still. And then we have a grass-fed lamb flock. And during the grazing season, that those ewes and their offspring spend the grazing season, we get paid to control the vegetation on about 1,000 acres of utility scale solars. Like I said, it's been an amazing journey and really proud to be part of your Beef Week podcast. I know it went on the week, but I texted you the other day. I think your whole thing is on fire here, and the people that you're having on to discuss all of these issues about the livestock industry, the processing industry, and how that's impacting rural America. I just think they're on fire. And I think these are topics that the American people, and especially rural America, we need to have these discussions.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I wanted to kind of loop back into, you mentioned your experience of, because we'll be in and out and try to follow the thread of your story, but also get some background on specific issues that I think deserve more attention. So you mentioned that your experience was more like with wholesale was more like Mike's than with Jason's, which are two recent interviews we've done here on the show. Mike talked about that being one of the big issues of processing. Like you get the meat processed and then you've got to sell it. And the wholesale compete, Cisco and what is it, US Foods? I always forget the name of the other one. Uh, or pretty much have the wholesale market covered at this point. It can be really challenging to move that. And you said your experience was more like Mike's. Yeah, I wonder if you'd say more about that.
Yeah, like I said, we've been really, really fortunate. We've got a customer base and clientele that really, really likes us. But the restaurant business, I think, is facing the same challenges, that there's not a lot of independence left. And I think they're facing the same challenges that rural American farmers are facing. Their margins are tight, their labor is difficult, their cost of food is high, and it's difficult to find a restaurant customer base, a large enough restaurant customer base that you can get the prices that you need and you can get the carcass utilization that you need. You know,
Mm.
you can sell a rib chop or a tenderloin to some restaurants, but that's 6, 8, 12% of the carcass is
Mm-hmm.
the best case scenario of what you're going to easily sell to upscale restaurants. What do you do with the rest of it?
Yeah.
And as the amount of independent restaurants decline that actually cook their food, we've always been kind of pigeonholed into that it takes a really, really nice upscale restaurant to be able to afford our product anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So, that makes a long delivery route. For us, that's 3 hours to Chicago or 3
Right.
hours to Indianapolis before we even make our first delivery. And then as those, they got destroyed. That the worst segment of the restaurant population that was hit the hardest by COVID was the downtown big city restaurants, the independents.
Mm-hmm.
You remember Chicago, they even closed Navy Pier because not because of COVID, but they closed it because people weren't coming to Chicago. So we lost a sizable percentage of our restaurant clientele in downtown Chicago because there just weren't people there. The offices had the people left, the people weren't coming to be tourists in Chicago, so there wasn't a business lunches, there wasn't business dinners, there wasn't the weekday tourist crowd, and rents are high enough that you can't run a downtown big city restaurant just on hoping that Friday and Saturday night's busy enough. That doesn't work. Overheads are too high. So
Mm-hmm.
so between the noise in the marketplace, the big guys now have brands that, if we go sell something in Chicago, I always figure that we have a dozen people following us now that say they have the same product as Greg. There's a couple of them that probably do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them that do, and so it's a difficult uphill battle, I think.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't want to downplay it because we have some really, really good customers. Chris Bayless, our biggest customer, it's been a great, great customer for 20 some years. You know, buys our product at volume.
Yeah. That's
I think the places like that, the relationships with farmers are already have been built. So
yeah.
to go into a place and find new ones of those, they already have their farmer.
Yeah.
So you're trying to make the pie bigger and making the pie bigger from restaurants that, asking them to pay 2, 3 times the price is a difficult sales proposition.
Yeah, then you're trying to break into markets that aren't the upscale ones. So
Right.
and then
Right.
you're directly competing with Cisco and it's that's tough. You kind of got in on the front end of this and with a lot of, hard work and determination because it didn't even exist. You got these big accounts that work now, but if you somebody else when you're ironically it almost sounds like someone else in your position there's more of a model for it, people have done it, but at the same time it seems like it would be kind of almost both easier and harder at the same time, if I don't know if that
We
makes
know in
sense.
some Yeah, in some ways it would be simpler because there's an awful lot more resources to understand
Right.
what you would need to do, like on the processing side and the legality of actually selling meat. But in some ways, I think it would be just way, way more difficult because there was like, I like to call them the glory years of farm to table, where, you could actually sell to, and the places didn't have established relationships. And those days I think are gone. And so, you'd have to have production, processing, and marketing that is just way, way more refined. And you'd have to do it at a lot bigger scale than what we do and what we would ever intend to want to do.
Yeah, it almost seems like there was kind of this growth period, and and that was around when Michael Pollan wrote that book, and or maybe that was even well into it, and that kind of we're running into right now sort of the reality of like this is the sort of the part of the food supply chain that's captured. And if there is going to be any more growth in the sort of local, regional, better food, it's going to have to actually now cut into the big guys instead of just kind of trimming around the edges. It
Right.
almost seems like
Yep.
the point at which the fight has kind of come up against these big guys has sort of arrived. That's sort of my perspective. What do you think about that?
Yep. Yeah, I'm sure you've probably seen it. I share this graph on Twitter and on social media on a regular basis, and I know from personal experience that numbers and statistics don't change people's minds. But I think it's so glaringly obvious that I share it anyways. USDA National Ag Statistics dropped the 2023 numbers for volume by slaughter establishment size. I think they dropped it back in September or October. But I think and I'll send it to you after, but 0.3% of the volume of hogs in the United States are slaughtered in establishments that do less than 10,000 pigs a year. I think both you and I would view that size establishment is the ones we think of as the small processors serving the small farmers for farm to table, the less than 200 pigs per week establishments. That's 0.3% of the volume of pigs in the United States.
Wow.
So if there's a retailer or if there's a restaurant group that is large that says that they're buying pork from small farmers through small processors, somebody's telling some stories or somebody's putting some box product from the big guys into that system somewhere because USDA's numbers just plain don't. We're in that thing that I think is glaringly interesting is 37 plants in the United States slaughter 96% of the pigs.
Yeah.
So, even though farm to table has become trendy and that, we talk about all this individually, there's a few of us that have won some battles, but collectively we've lost the war. And, we have a lot of work to do if we want to make local and regional food something in the United States. And I think we have a lot that we have to acknowledge that, hey, even though in some ways it's trendy, in some ways it just plain didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, and there's only so many people. I talked about this a little bit with Jason. There's only so many people who want to, buy a half of steer and put it in the freezer or half a hog or whatever. That's just there's going to be a cap there.
Right. Right. And I was naive when we started. My vision, and I think my story. We did pastured chickens for 20 some years. Finally, the first year of COVID was the casualty for our chicken. But I was naive 20 some years ago. I really believed that pastured poultry would end up becoming 10, 12, 16% of the US market. And it's a fraction of the marketplace.
Yeah.
And there's two legitimate paths to do pastured chicken nowadays. You can be the small exempt processor that does up to the 20,000 per year, or you can go to one of the. I don't think there's more than 25 plants in the whole country that'll even process chickens for farmers. That you can run through one of those, and the only legitimate market left for those guys they're selling white labeled products. They're either direct marketing themselves or they're selling white labeled chicken to one of the other brands that's direct marketing. Direct to consumer is about all that's left on that. And I think
Hmm.
I think it's working its way through. That's almost the only thing that's left in pork and beef is that you have to be direct to individual consumer because you can build a brand that way and you can build some loyalty and you can actually get the margins that you need to
Yeah.
justify niche production, small scale processing, and niche distribution.
Yeah, so there's few directions here. One, I wanted to kind of go back and, you mentioned your very beginning of, you're kind of like, you love pigs. I want to raise pigs. Everybody says it's kind of crazy to raise pigs right now. It doesn't seem good. And you were like, I'm going to do that anyway. And, what happened was kind of you lived through that great consolidation, like you mentioned in the hog industry, where it just, used to be in the landscape. I mean, I grew up, I wasn't on a through the country, and you won't see a pig. Like, you just won't. They're nowhere to be found. You might see some. If you do see a pig, it's because it's a 4-H project for some kid, and that's like it. But it used to there'd be pigs everywhere. You'd see little hog houses of various sorts, little Quonset huts or little whatever, and that's gone. And that happened in the time frame you're talking about. And it seems to me that I've talked about this a bit that in agriculture, it's been eggs, it's been poultry, it's been hogs, grain captured by corporate monopolies, corporate interests. And part of what I'm seeing now is that beef, at least for like a huge part of the life cycle of a cow, has managed to stay relatively independent because you can kind of manage if you with lower inputs but that market, we've talked about that a lot on the show, has been pressured and pressured and pressured so much that it's somehow it's been able to, I think, basically because of how a cow is and what a cow needs, been able to kind of resist this corporate cycle, but it seems to be closing in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Agriculture has done that whole industrialization, specialization, consolidation. It started with the eggs, then it was the broilers, then it was the fat cattle, the feeders, then it was the hogs. We're still living through the end of the loss of the independent dairy operation. Those cow calf guys have remained independent. And I'd actually argue that about the only thing that's left independent agriculture out here in the United States. And I know it triggers farmers, but I'm going to say it anyways. So it's the cow calf guys and it's us niche marketers. There's
Yeah.
not really much of anything left that's not either corporate or government controlled in agriculture. And, it's kind of ironic because, as a society, we look at agriculture as the last bastion of independence. Collectively, we've allowed that all to be given up, and that's a shame in my opinion. Our area was the same as what you're talking about. You go up and down the roads, and almost everybody still had hogs when I was little. A sizable percentage of them in our area had dairy cows. The next county over us from me, there were 400 dairy farms when I was young. There's 4 left. 99% have disappeared in my lifetime. I think the statistic is 3% of the dairy farms now produce 50% of the milk. We
Uh-huh.
should keep the independent family dairy farm in this country, but as a nation, we've chosen not to even put that as a priority. We should have kept the hog farms in this country. There was a time frame when I can still just barely remember it. 70s, guy could buy a farm, milk some cows or raise some sows, could pay for the farm, could feed a family and could make a living. And that is a shame because those days are gone. It's really, really difficult for anybody to justify buying and owning a farm nowadays. The money's got to come from somewhere else. It
Yeah.
can't come from farming activities. And that's wrong because rural America used to be a nation of farmers and it used to be a area of opportunity. And we've just kind of let that go away, not worried about it.
No, it's like I mean, I think you can't really overstate the degree to which too that like the farming consolidation, the plight of it's not just small farms, small medium, the agriculture being sort of captured is just the ruination of rural places. I mean, farming is the economic backbone of rural places. I mean, at least throughout the Midwest, there's some places that, maybe rural economies are built around, other industries, but by and large, especially through the heartland, agriculture is the lifeblood of the rural economy, and it's quite simply just been decimated over the last decades. An attack on independent agriculture is an attack on rural places, and it's um, we've been pretty blind to that, I think, or somehow accepted this trade-off that, like, we'll make cheap food, and that's, we've decided, like, that's great, but ignored the fact of what that's done and the communities that has completely hollowed out.
Well, realistically, we don't talk enough about the fact that this industrialization and consolidation has been, and the massive appreciation in land value has been good to a really, really small
Yeah.
percentage of those in rural America. Those that either by luck or by good business decisions bought a sizable acreages of land back when land was cheap, got huge government subsidies over the last 30 years. There's some of them that are setting really, really well that have, you look at their balance sheet, just to what the land is worth, they're worth millions and millions of dollars. But we've really created a rural America where there's a few have and an awful lot of have nots. And the metrics of rural America are worse than a lot of the inner city metrics now. And we don't talk about that enough. And in fact, we allow a large percentage of those exact people, the ones that were born rounding third base and cheering that they hit home runs. And I got nothing against that. We ought to let people inherit things in the United States and all that. But you can't be born rounding third base, cheering that you hit home runs, and then stick them on the Farm Bureau and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association so that they can go do policy and say that everything is fine in rural America. Because everything is not fine in rural America. Everything is fine for you at home because you, generations before, put you in a really good spot. And that's a different scenario. And we really need to talk about that sometime.
Boy, oh boy. Yeah. Right now is a good time. Yeah. This, it's just a fact. That's a really important fact that, and sometimes it can be, it's a very sensitive area because, I think politically, in rural America, farmers are still seen as like, man, it's important. Farming and farms are important. And because of that, like you mentioned, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, especially around here at the Farm Bureau, have enjoyed being able to be seen as like the voice of farmers. And the voice of farmers in rural America gets this huge outsized influence over policy. But it's the voice of the farmers that you're talking about, right? It's the voice of the farm, like, who are, I mean, literal multimillionaires, like sometimes mini multis.
Yeah.
Because if you won that game, if you won the consolidation game in the 80s, 90s, if you won that game, what I mean, you did
Right.
well. You did real
Right.
well.
If you bought land before the 1970s and you survived the 1980s, your balance sheet looks really, really good right now. If you wanted to get started right now and go out in our area, it's 10, 12, $14,000 an acre land, and thought that you were going to farm anything to even remotely close to make that payment, that's not going to happen. And you're sitting there listening to people saying that agriculture's fine. It's like, yeah, like I said, it's fine for you, but we need to have those discussions because rural America is in a crisis. There's not a lot of enterprises that actually allow a farm to have decent margins, support a family, grow a business. And I think I was somewhat naive, and I think Mike alluded to the same thing. I was somewhat naive that a scrappy young entrepreneur could step outside of the system, build their own processing plant, and sell into, either wholesale to retailers or wholesale to food service. And that, that could work within this predatory concentrated system. And I'm coming to the conclusion that I'm just about convinced long term that you have to sell direct to the individual consumer because
Mhm.
our marketplace is just too concentrated and too predatory that I don't think you survive long term otherwise. And don't get me wrong, I'm sitting here telling you that, and we don't have a direct consumer model that we're building. But I don't think that processors and direct marketing farmers survive without a direct to individual consumer, because I think that that's consolidated also.
Right, and and that's what you alluded to before, is because you were kind of early on this, you got those accounts that now you kind of are still maintaining, but that someone new isn't going to be able to likely follow your path very
Right,
likely at
right,
all.
and in some ways, I'm one of those farmers. Don't get me wrong, I got a lot of debt, and I don't have a huge amount of money in the bank, but I'm one of those farmers that, because of past decisions, I'm at the top of the hill defending the hill rather than at the bottom of the hill trying to figure out how to get up the hill. So, I mean, I've got some decent relationships and we'll be able to carry on. But I know for a fact that it'd just be about damn near impossible to start a processing plant based on wholesale sales in 2025. I just
Right,
think
and we
that's
don't,
a
and we
shame in the United States when there's the level of people that want to know how their food's raised, how it's processed, how it's handled. It seems like the marketplace should just be wanting that in a large way.
yeah, it was as we're thinking about growing, and if we want to grow opportunities, grow good food, grow the ability to for people to make a living farming. We don't want to cannibalize each other. People at the bottom trying to come up, and we're not trying to cannibalize what you've done. We're at the point where we need to really yeah, continue direct marketing, but also scrape at the margins of what the monopolies are doing. So I think that's why we're kind of it seems like the fight is here, if you ask me. So I also wanted
Yeah, I
oh,
think I
go ahead.
okay.
No, go ahead.
I think we got to get some chefs, some purchasers at some of the universities, the school systems. We got to get some that are willing to step up and say we got to give these little guys a shot. And we realize that it's going to cost more, but it's a much more resilient system. It's much better food. It's much better for the environment. It's better for the animals. It's better for the workers. We can go on and on about all of the reasons it's better, and we do have to acknowledge, it's better for rural communities. We need to keep this money in communities rather than multinational corporations immediately taking these funds out of these. But we need to start this process, and we need to be real about starting this process, and we need to give some little guys some shot, because there's some small farmers and there's some small processors that would just love some chances.
Yes, and I want to loop back to this because I really want to dig in to this conversation here. But before we do that, I want to kind of go back to you making the decision to not just sell pigs, not just because you kind of said sort of stubbornly, it sounds like, be like, I like pigs, I'm going to grow pigs, even though all the signs point to no. I'm going to do it anyway. Take me through the decision to do a USDA slaughter facility on your farm, and tell me about how that process has been for you, because I really want to understand more this whole processing side of things, because there's a lot there to talk about.
Sure. We got the opportunity to sell dressed pigs to Charlie Trotter in Chicago, and we didn't own a processing plant at the time. Found a small processor that would actually harvest and process the animal for us. But it was really, really quick for me to figure out that if we were going to sell to upscale restaurants in the big city, that one of the biggest challenges was going to be getting the number of animals in that we needed harvested every week. And then the second big challenge was going to be making sure that those animals were cut and packaged in a manner that were acceptable for upscale restaurants and chefs. And so we really quickly figured out that we were going to have to control that processing to do that. And my wife and I actually became owners of a federally inspected processing plant 37 miles north of us. And I don't think most people realize this, but we were owners of another plant for 3 years, and I failed miserably. I was either at that plant when I should have been at the farm, or I was off making deliveries when I should have been at both of them, and I just plain couldn't manage that, couldn't make it work. Once again, I was stubborn enough to say that, I could actually manage a processing plant if we had a processing plant on the farm. And so we built a processing plant on the farm, and I should have been a little bit wiser. Even got a degree in economics from the land grant university. And I don't know why I didn't think about the fact that we failed at being part owners of a processing plant off the farm. There was no financial institution that was going to loan us money to build a processing plant on the farm after we'd already failed. And we did it anyway. So, my methods of financing a processing plant were probably not wise. And when I was listening to your conversation with Jason, and you're talking about undercapitalized. There's undercapitalized, and then there's the level of undercapitalized that we started a processing plant with. So we started a processing plant with prayer and hope and a lot of debt, and we made it work. It was we were at the right place at the right time, lots of times, and I worked way too many sleepless nights, but we pulled it off. The process is relatively the same nowadays as what it was back then. You send a grant of inspection application to the district office, and they're supposed to come out and talk to you right away. It took me 14 months to even get USDA to come out to the farm to talk to us. It's actually a much easier world to deal with USDA as a little processors. I feel like some of our advocacy work has actually helped in that. I feel like that there's some congressmen and senators that actually make them closer to actually doing the job that they're supposed to. But it took 14 months. And I still refer to those first 5 to 7 years with USDA as our hazing years. But they really did not want us in their system, and they did every single thing within their power. And I was naive. I really believed that if we did what we were supposed to and that I tried to get along with them, that they'd actually get along with us. My wife finally convinced me that that wasn't going to work. USDA would probably define me maybe insufferable. I'm not sure the words they'd use, but chip on my shoulder. I don't know what they would use. I wake up every morning if USDA, if they got policy, I expect them to follow it. And if they're not going to follow it, I'm probably going to just keep right going up through the chain of command until they do follow it. And, it's not a good way to live that you got to fight with the USDA all of the time. But realistically, if you're going to run a processing plant, you can get yourself into a really, really bad situation long term if you go along with everything that they say when you know that they're not correct. And I read the Meat and Poultry Act, the regulations, the directives, and the notices, and I just assumed that the inspectors had also. That's a very, very poor assumption. The inspectors haven't read the regulation. There's a few of them that have, but there's very, very few of them that have. And I think one of the things that most people don't understand, and we talked about this earlier on the phone, the meat and poultry inspection since HACCP, in some ways I'm not a fan of HACCP, but in some ways I am a fan of HACCP. HACCP actually gives you, if you understand HACCP and you use HACCP correctly, HACCP actually gives you the flexibility to do just about anything that you can do, that you want to do in a meat plant, as long as you can support it scientifically and you can support it with the regulation. And so in lots of ways, HACCP gives you flexibility, but HACCP also gives them the rope to hang you if you can't support what you're doing and you think that they're the ones that are going to tell you whether or not you can do what you want to do.
Can you tell us what HACCP?
HACCP is Hazard Analysis Critical Control Program. They put HACCP was a congressional act in 1996 that meat and poultry inspection used to be command and control. So it used to be the inspector came out, and if you were doing something wrong, they stopped you till you fixed it, and then they let you go back to work. With HACCP, now you have to have a HACCP system. So you have to have a Hazard Analysis Critical Control Plan for everything you produce. And it's actually really simple. People like to make it out like it's rocket science. It's really, really simple. It's identify every step of your process, so in slaughter, that's you're bringing in a live animal, you're bringing it in, you're stunning it, you're bleeding it, you're skinning it or scalding it, you're eviscerating it, you're spraying it, you're putting an antimicrobial on it, you're doing your final tolerance or, checks for zero tolerance. So it's identify every step, and then what are the potentials for physical, chemical, and microbiological contamination at that? And what are you doing to control those? And then what are you doing to monitor that you actually did what you said you're going to do? And if you do that, USDA might hassle you, but there's really nothing they can do about it. If you have a HACCP system that is sound and that's supportable and you're actually following it. And if you want to, you know, butcher in a cardboard box in one corner of a facility and you want to do something different tomorrow and you want to write all the paperwork to do that, you can do whatever you want. Jason's example, if you want to grind beef trim, USDA has an expectation that your program is that you have validated antimicrobial programs. So you have a microbial program that you can demonstrate that you had the concentrations correct and that you actually applied it, and that you have a scientific paper that says it's going to get the log reductions that you need. Then you have to have a statistically sound testing program that if you still have E. coli 0157, that you have enough testing in a random fashion that it likely would find that through a test. And then you have to have all of that on paper, and you have to do everything that you say that's in paper. And then don't get me wrong, you can still get drunk, crazy inspectors that aren't going to be happy about that. But then you have to have a friend. And, we know the big guys all have these connections to the point that they got somebody in Congress or they got a friend that works for USDA at Washington, D.C., that they make a phone call to the point that the district office gives that person to actually demonstrate that they actually have the program that they need, and then they let them go. And I think the big difference right now, and I'm probably one of the few that will say this, because I actually think HACCP gives us some opportunities. I think it, don't get me wrong, we don't need paperwork, and I think that they make you produce way too much paperwork. But I think if we use it correctly, it does actually give us some flexibility. And I think that if you have the correct mindset and realize that 100% it's our responsibility to produce safe food, and it's our responsibility to have a set of paperwork that demonstrates how we're producing safe food. We can never think that USDA is going to approve something that we do, because USDA doesn't approve anything. They don't even approve your facility plan. That's been since Al Gore was vice president. They don't approve anything. So if you have the attitude, and I used to be in that same category, if you think that USDA is going to approve what you're going to do, you'll wait forever, till the cows come home, till you can ever be able to do it. You have to be wise in what you're going to do, but then you just have to do it. Like if you were going to produce a ready to eat product or ground beef, and you have a HACCP plan in place, you got to start producing it. You just got to be wise and don't finish your pre-shipment review so USDA could actually say that it was out in commerce if they find an error, and then they'd want to do a recall. But don't finish your pre-shipment, produce the product, and then you force them. If they think that they have some kind of issue with either your HACCP plan or what you're doing, they have to write you a non-compliance report. But if you never produce it, they have no obligation whatsoever to tell you what they think is wrong with your program.
So you're forcing them to do their job, basically.
Yeah, you got to force them to do their job.
And if you wait for them to do the job, they won't. But if you force them to, they will.
They won't. Yeah, their actual policy doesn't allow them to tell you whether your HACCP system is okay. Their policy allows them to tell you that it's wrong, but only if you're producing something.
So basically, in short, it's like if you say, hey, here's our procedure we want to do. Do you think this is good? You'll wait forever. You make sure you have the procedure and plan that like you have to be. Then this is where you have to take a lot of care. Okay, here's the law. Here's how it meets the law. Here's how it does that, right? You have that developed and you have that written down, and then you do it and say, hey, here's this product we have. We're going to sell it. We have it right here. I'm going to sell this. Here's how we got this. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to do that now. And then then they're like, oh shit, we better look and make sure that's okay. And then they have to do their job.
Right. And like I said, don't sign your pre-shipment review. So if they find something that was a major glaring error that you didn't do, so that they don't tell you that they're going to do a recall. But, if you go up to that step, they actually have to do their job, and they have to determine what, and then you get into the system. And this took me a long time to realize too, is that once they issue you that non-compliance report, if you disagree, you have the right in the United States to get a timely decision So you have the right to appeal that. You have the right to talk to an inspector, which in USDA FSIS case is the tech service, the policy division. You have the right to have a correlation meeting with them. You have the right to appeal it to their boss or their boss's boss. And, they have to give you an answer to those appeals within 2 weeks. So, and then when they don't give you those administrative tools and those due process, and this may sound like semantics, but it's not, your congressman and your senator and the higher ups with USDA in Washington, D.C. will have serious problems with them if they didn't give you the opportunity for you to be able to demonstrate that you were correct and that they were wrong. They will not join in the fight at all if you want to tell them that, hey, I could produce ground beef over here, and USDA is saying I can't. That's an argument over whether or not you're correct or they're correct. The argument over whether or not you have the ability to prove you're correct, that's a different argument.
Anyway, we were just talking about how you need to have a degree in bureaucracy, it seems like, to be able to navigate this. It is navigable, but you've got to just know exactly how to navigate these people and these systems, play by their rules and force them to play by their rules. If you do that, it can be done, but it still adds a lot of unnecessary time and money to the situation, even with your ability to navigate that, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, basically, to sum it up, it's understanding administrative law and understanding what rights you have and what abilities you have to uh, discuss and or fight with the regulator when you know you're correct. And I think that one of the trade groups should actually put a small class on this, because I think with a 1 to 2 hours of training, I think person could be really, really up to speed on understanding administrative law and understanding the tools that you actually have, because if you don't understand your right to appeal decision, you don't understand your right to be able to file formal complaints. Um, you don't understand how you should deal with USDA. You put yourself at a huge, huge disadvantage. And that, once again, is not rocket science. And you and I could sit here and argue all day long that we shouldn't have to know this. And I didn't know it when I started, but it makes life a lot simpler if you do know it. And it makes life a lot simpler to actually get help through Congress, Senate, through the higher ups in Washington, D.C. If you can demonstrate why USDA is not following policy, and especially if you can demonstrate why they're denying your due process to actually get a timely decision.
So now I'm thinking, and I go back to the conversation with Mike, and he described the plant he uses, the mobile plant, or really it's a modular plant. It sounds like he uses that, so he has that, basically at a good location, and it's real efficient. It sounds like he understands very well how to navigate the bureaucracy to make it, as there's always going to be friction, but as minimal friction as possible. And I'm just wondering what that would look like. Like I want to kind of shift to well, how do we? So we have these challenges of kind of absurd regulations and arbitrary regulators that there are tools to work with, but it's still kind of part of it. What can be done? How do we get from A to B? How do we build this out? How do new processors get developed? We've talked about some of the economic challenges. What are some legislative things that can help both at the federal and state level? I kind of want to get if we think about how to make this better, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of challenges, and I kind of want to talk through those.
I could think of several things that, and I actually met with the secretary in DC a few weeks ago, and my
The
suggestions
Secretary
are.
Rollins?
Yeah, I met with
Nice.
Secretary Rollins, yeah, back in November. Yeah, it was a pretty cool meeting, about an hour and a half.
Nice.
And it was me and three other very small slaughter plant
That's
owners.
that's
So the
awesome. She
yeah,
seems to be listening, put it that way.
yeah, I'm actually impressed, and she seems to be giving some of the other, what I would consider yours and my issues time, which is, good. But my suggestions are that I think that we need an ombudsman within outside of USDA, so within the Small Business Administration, so that there's a unbiased third party that is, able to help little plants, especially to make sure that they get due process. You know, I think the meat and poultry regulations are actually a good thing. We should have safe meat and poultry, but I think the big challenge is when, as a plant owner, if you know you're correct and you know the inspector is wrong, I think that lots of people struggle to figure out how to find their way through that to the point that they actually get the decision that they need. And I think that I think that's actually what the Small Business Administration is for. I think we need a small grant program. I think it's a micro grant program, and people will laugh at me when I say it. That I think it's a 25 or $50,000 per year, and people will say, "Well, that won't make a dent or drop in the bucket for any kind of equipment or any kind of needs in a small plant." And I think that amount of money cleans up the structure performance standards, the food safety issues, the things that USDA complains about, the the fact that you own a plant for 20 years and you never really end up with the money to fix the things that you need to, that the inspectors constantly harass you about. And the other thing that I think that fixes is that is insignificant to the large plant. So the large plant wouldn't chase that money because it would be a drop in the bucket. And so, if you're going to give money to facilities to actually build local infrastructure, it should be money that is meaningful to the smallest of plants and insignificantly meaningful to the bigger
So
plants.
to me, kind of what that sounds like is almost like you're going to go through this bureaucratic rigmarole. Again, food safety is the goal and is important, but you got to do it the USDA's way, and that incurs a ton of other costs. This is sort of a way to defray that cost that is born. A smaller plant, it's really $50,000 a year on a small plant is extremely cumbersome, whereas Tyson could care less. It's not going to matter to them at all. But you
Right,
can use that. That would
right.
essentially defray the cost of complying with the USDA's regs.
Right, right, like, if you got cracks in the floor that, you and I wouldn't think is a huge issue, but USDA likes to harass you about it. You could fix your cracks in the floor. If you got, you could even come up with something that, some small modification on your kill floor that drastically or significantly improved your efficiency, but you could never come up with the 25 or $50,000 to change where the rail is or put the winch over here or put move your antimicrobial station or whatever it is, or improve your knock box. The money in little plants for those kind of things never seems to end up being there. And I'm just saying that a grant program that's like that, that's ongoing, long term, somebody like us that's been in the business for 20 some years, that'd be $400,000. That's over I'd have a beautiful facility now if we drop dollars into, and instead I've got a facility that we live on depreciation because we don't have the money to fix some of the things that we need to fix. So I think that would change things. And then I think one of the other things that would change things is that I think they need to embrace the two programs that allow state inspectors to act as federal inspectors. So the Talmadge-Akins program and the cooperative inspection system program. And I think they've fought those. And I think from both a taxpayer standpoint and from a politics and bureaucracy, there's just way less politics and bureaucracy in state inspected programs, and they're just more appropriate to dealing with the little plants. And it just costs the taxpayers way less
So
money.
that is, if I understand correctly, those programs enable basically at the state level, states can say our program is going to be compliant with every USDA law. We will faithfully represent USDA law in our local plants. And by agreeing to that, then our state inspected facilities will then be de facto federally inspected facilities, and the product will be treated like it's federally inspected. Is that a good way to understand it?
Yeah, that's a fair summary. There's one more step in that they actually have to approve them. In the Talmadge-Akins program, the USDA actually subcontracts for that state inspector, so they literally pay the state inspector. And then in the cooperative inspected program, they have a federal deep. Normally, it's a veterinarian that goes around and actually approves the facilities. So the selected state inspected plants can be federal plants, and then they oversee on both of those. Then the federal government oversees and has one more step of oversight. And it's just, if you look around the country, a sizable percentage of the little plants are in one of those two programs. And I'd argue it's because the average person either can't or won't deal with all of that politics, bureaucracy, and understanding administrative law and figuring out how you actually fit into a federal system that can actually be a
So if you
monster.
live in a state that has a state inspection program and you're a small processor wanting to become a small processor, like do you have the ability right now to be like, I'd like to use one of these programs and just do my like do you have the ability to do that in a state that has a state inspection program?
Like us, we're specifically disqualified from the program, because if you've ever been USDA, you can't be
Okay.
part of one of those programs for 2 years. So any plant that's ever been fully USDA doesn't. But I would highly recommend anybody that's starting a plant, if they are in one of those 27 states, and I'm not sure how many of those, I want to say it's only 9 or 10 actually have the cooperative inspection program. But if they're in one of those states, I highly recommend getting state inspected and then applying to be a cooperative inspected plant rather than being full USDA inspection, just because there's just so much less politics and bureaucracy that way. I think your state, Illinois, has the Talmadge-Jenkins program, where in lots of the little plants, the USDA actually hires the state inspectors. Indiana has the cooperative inspected program. Wisconsin has it. I want to say there's like 9 or 10 states now that have it, but USDA could put more effort and put more funding into that, because state programs inspect plants at a fraction of the cost of what the USDA program. I would bet it's somewhere in the 30 to 45% is what it costs state programs to inspect plants compared to what USDA's plants. And USDA only puts 50% of the money in for the states. So the states are at a disadvantage. They have to still pay for, half of the funding to fund these state plants, where if USDA funded the whole thing, they'd literally have less cost than if they ran the inspector through these little plants. But then they need some oversight on the other side too. They're actually discouraging these, and part of the reason they're discouraging them, if you remember that latest boarhead recall, which I think had 150 or 170 employees in the plant, that was a Talmadge-Jenkins inspected plant. So that was a state inspector with no USDA inspector in the plant. These programs were not designed for facilities that have 150, 200 employees. They were designed for little facilities that the inspector can walk in, see the whole facility. And I'd argue that little facilities that the inspector can walk in and see the whole process standing in one place aren't really designed to fit in the federal program. There's appropriate, and we have things at the federal level that follow these kind of ideas, and I think it fits right in line whether a person's a strong conservative or a strong liberal. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is an excellent example. By statute, they can only regulate the largest 94% of financial institutions. They have to leave the ones alone that have 10 billion or less in assets. USDA could do the same thing. They could say they have to leave the ones alone, the smallest 6% of the slaughter plants in the industry, and not only leave them to the state, but provide the state the funding to be able to
Yeah,
inspect them and still allow them to go across state lines. It just seems like it
that's
makes sense. It would cost less
that's
money.
wonderfully common sense, and it sounds like it's actually close. Like that's something that, let the Tysons and the Cargills of the world deal with the feds, and the smaller places and the tools are kind of in place now in a lot of states, not everywhere, but if a state has a state inspected program, you can have the opportunity as a small plant to transfer that state inspection to being a de facto federal
Yeah.
one. And so we need to build that out. So those are a few of your ideas of, making sure that more people are able to take advantage of that. Tommy Jenkins, or sorry, I wasn't.
Talmadge-Jenkins.
And the cooperative inspection program. This idea of a grant program for smaller facilities. and then this ombudsman to the small, like to make sure that whatever difficulties are being had, that there's a pretty direct line for the smaller guys to be able to get their concerns heard, instead of needing to, the big guys never have a hard time getting their problems addressed.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think I was naive in that at the beginning too. I didn't realize the system was so much who you know and, where the buttons are pushed. But I think we all realize now the big guys have the ability to do those on a regular basis. You read the quarterly enforcement report and little guys will just languish in enforcement for weeks at a time. The big guys, if they get an enforcement action, a suspension or a notice of intended enforcement, it's always in abeyance within one day. So I mean, you can tell just by looking at their paperwork.
So here's a question I have that I'm not clear on. It's probably like a simple. So slaughter, right? We're talking about, the plants that, you bring a live animal in, you kill them. This is all. Now, let's say after that step. So, and let's say you just hang your carcass, right? And then you send it to a butcher. Now, what regulations does then that butcher have? Now, is that normal, just food safety regulations, or what's the next step there?
Ironically, most people don't stop and think about that the largest exemption to USDA inspection at that processing step is the retail exemption. So on the processing side, you can have state inspected, you can have USDA inspected, you can have retail. So like if you walk into Walmart, Kroger, Sam's Club, look at their butcher shop, you can also have custom exempt. And custom exempt gets the not for sale. The retail doesn't get a state or USDA legend on it. The custom and the retail would get an inspector once or twice a year at the most, just to inspect the facility. USDA or state inspected on the processing side is going to get an inspector at least once per shift.
Okay.
And on the slaughter side, the USDA or the state inspected plant is going to have an inspector in the facility the whole time that they're slaughtering. So the other thing that people don't ever stop and think about is that the highest frequency of inspection in the whole meat and poultry system is these little plants out in rural America that slaughter 1 or 2 days a week, process the other days of the week, and USDA, and not that they're being nefarious or anything, but USDA, in order so that they can ensure that they can staff that slaughter, because they have to have somebody there every single minute they slaughter, they'll put a full-time inspector in that plant. So on those 3 or 4 days a week that you're processing only, you'll have an inspector in the plant the whole 8 hours that you're processing. If you were a facility in town that was producing ready to eat product, or you were producing ground beef, and say that facility was 100,000 square feet, 2.5 acre facility, you would get a patrol inspection that inspector would have 4 or 5 other plants. You'd see the inspector 15 minutes a day. If you're a little plant just processing, you'll see that inspector for the whole 8 hours. And if the inspector's sane and reasonable, that's not a problem. But if the inspector is one of those, I like to call them the crazies or the lazies of the inspection. And I think about 80% of USDA staff is sane and reasonable, normal people. But they've got a 10% on one end that there's nobody on the planet that can get along with them. And then they got 10% on the other end that's just as dangerous, that flat out don't do their job. And USDA actually struggles to figure out what to do with either of those. The 10% of an inspector there the whole time you're processing, and they're one of the crazies. That's a huge disadvantage compared to if you were just a processing only plant and got that inspector for only 15 minutes a day.
Wow. So that's interesting too. Like if you were just if you just did the killing and the quartering of the animal and that's it, and then you move it on to the butcher shop or whoever's going to retail, that person then breaking it down further is under a much more lax inspection regime, much less.
I always make the argument when people start talking about the mobile slaughter as the answer. I actually make the opposite argument. I think brick and mortar fixed scaled slaughter, and then I think that the processing out on the farms at the micro level actually makes a lot more sense from both an economic and fitting in the existing system. Slaughter is very capital intensive, requires a HACCP plan, requires sound, wise people to make sure that your antimicrobial program's validated, that your sanitary dressing requires that USDA be there the whole time. But then if you take those carcasses, take them back to the farm, some of them could do them as retail, if they were in an area where they could actually get the people out to the farm, the local health department, city, or state would just inspect them once or twice a year. If they needed inspection because they were either going to go to the farmer's market or they were going to wholesale it or they were going to sell it at a retail shop somewhere else, they could have state or USDA inspection. USDA or the state wouldn't hassle bringing them on because they know they only got to show up at some point during the day. They don't have to find an inspector. So they probably already have an inspector that's going by. That whole system fits. And I think that to do that, we just need to get enough farmers to cooperate enough to make sure that we actually have the slaughter plants that'll run close enough to capacity. We've actually added capacity at the farm because I envision someday that we actually be one of them that slaughtered for those other farmers that took carcasses.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this. So, what you would say would be kind of a central, and maybe cooperatively owned, whatever, like a central, like this is the slaughter plant. Everybody's going to bring their animals to this plant, right? And this plant's going to do the minimum of kill it and move it through because they're under inspection and like do the stuff you have to do under inspection, the minimal amount.
Kill it,
and chill it. And then after that happens, then you send it back to, wherever, like if you're a farmer and you wanted to have a processing facility, all you're doing is you're cutting it up and labeling it and reselling it. But you don't go ahead and
the other thing that fixes, almost every farmer complains about their processor. And if you stop and think about it, the reason that most people complain is either the way that it's cut up, or the way that it's labeled, or the way that it's packaged. And if you did that, you personally would be controlling the aspects that determine the professionalism and the presentation of your product.
So if you wanted to do that yourself, you could, or you could use another processor that was doing the same thing. That's like, well, I don't want to mess with butchering it, but then you could have this other butcher shop that could do it for you, but they don't have to do the whole rigmarole of the slaughter plant. They're still under the same,
Right.
But that's really interesting. So you have a centralized owned you are just going to focus specifically on, you're not boxing everything up. You're not doing the cuts there. You're just getting it into the rawest form that you can under inspection so that you can get it out to someone else who has a easier time.
Right. And this micro processing fits in spaces the size of shipping containers. And it's, just simple. And, I'd argue that the infrastructure to get the animals to the slaughter plant's already there. We already understand putting animals on trailers,
Sure.
Whether that's pickups or semis.
Yeah, everybody
or whatever,
does that already. That's already existing.
Yeah, everybody does that already, and so we need a little bit more infrastructure in that. There needs to be some refrigerated vehicles that can haul some carcasses around.
Like if you pulled up you could you could have a ton of, I'm thinking beef, right? You could have a ton of beef, hanging in a cooler, so you can go get your cooler filled up with a ton of beef, age it for however long you want, 2 or 3 weeks, and then have it cut. And all that can be done under a easier inspection regime after the kill is made, right? The kill and the initial breakdown is made.
Yeah.
I've always been enamored with the idea of mobile slaughter units, but what you're saying, makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of difficulty with those mobile slaughter too. I mean, I like from a humane perspective, there's a lot of things I like about on-farm slaughter, but we already truck our animals. Everybody already trucks their animals. It's not, it's just sort of the way. I mean, some of this stuff, when we think about how we kind of get back to, some sanity in the food system, we can't reinvent every wheel, right? Some of the things have to be reinvented, but some of the things is like, well, this is just how it is now. And so instead of having to completely reinvent the wheel, how can we take advantage of things that we already know how to do? And so that's really an interesting idea.
Yeah, I like mobile slaughter too, but I think the logistical challenges of mobile slaughter, especially to fit in an inspection system, where you have to have animal handling facilities because, USDA takes humane handling actually really serious. Ironically, plants get shut down more for humane handling. You could argue back and forth about whether the facility was clean for 6 months or a year before they'd ever get a suspension. USDA closes them down immediately if they say it. So you'd need animal handling facilities, you need potable water, you need electricity, you need waste handling, you need composting, and you need paperwork to justify that all of those are compliant at every single location, plus the fact that you actually have to haul it every day. And then I think the other big challenge is that when you do that, you're just limited on scale. A fixed facility with that same amount of people would just be able to do a lot more animals in a day and not have to load the mobile trailer up at the end of the day, set it up
Yeah.
the next day at another place to have a much smaller quantity of animals that they're able to
Makes
harvest.
me wonder what the cost of something like that would be. It makes me want to just kind of think through all because that seems like a very, the challenge is, if you're getting to where, okay, so like you're size enough, you can bring enough animals in to make it work, then how many animals, what's the to support the number of animals that you're being able to slaughter at that facility, how many butchers do you need to have essentially to support that? Oh, because then essentially you're bringing all these animals in, which there's no bottleneck with this. I mean, you can find the animals right now, but I think people would be looking for alternatives to selling it to at the sale barn or whatever. But it would be a matter of then, can you move, that many hung, basically halves, quarters, hung animals? Can you move those to enough butcher shops then to people? That would be the limiting factor there. So you need basically a network of direct marketers who are all kind of working together, right, to make sure you have that animal to be able to support that facility.
And see, I think and this is just me pontificating, I think the scale for that slaughter plant needs to be at least 20,000 to 40,000 pounds per day. And I think it needs to run 5 days a week. I think to keep the cost in line and to justify the people that you actually need at the slaughter plant, both from the actual production and for the paperwork end of it. I think that's where you need to be. So, if you're talking pigs, that's 100 to 200 per day. If you're talking cattle, what is that? 40, 30 to 60 cattle a
And
day.
you
That's,
could alternate a facility like that, right? Like you have Monday's beef
yeah,
day, Tuesday's
yeah,
hog day,
yeah,
Wednesday's lamb
yeah,
day,
yeah,
Thursday's beef day, Friday's hog day, something like that,
yeah, yeah,
'cause it's all the same
yeah,
equipment.
yeah. And right. Right. So, and I think the other big advantage of that is that long term, it's an entry point to get people into the business. So there's going to be some of those people, if they put a shipping container, small inspected micro processing on their farm, some of them, 2, 3, 5 years into the process are going to say, "Hey, we've grown our business enough. We should actually add our slaughter here." There's going to be some people that will grow out of that into more slaughter plants. I think that's the legitimate path to actually rebuild the local and regional slaughter and processing. I think it's a path that works within the current inspection system. I think it works within the current marketplace. And I think that the infrastructure and the investment is something that is able to be doable. The realistic challenge is that most smaller farmers and most direct marketing farmers are not going to be able to bite off the amount of money that's required to actually build a slaughter plant on their farm. We did it with the shoestring, and it worked for us. But I don't know that most people, I'm not saying I'm smarter than anybody, but I'm just saying that depending on your jurisdiction you're in, because you got wastewater issues and compost issues before you get to the state commercial design review and USDA for facility requirements, a lot of stars got to align to be able to make that happen. Where if
Yeah.
you're just putting a shipping container in for processing and then you're already in the system in virtually every jurisdiction, if you're already an inspected meat processor, probably not a big deal for them to say, "Oh yeah, you've got a good track record. Why wouldn't we let you add on and slaughter at your
Mhm,
farm?"
mhm. Wow, I love that. That's fascinating. And it gives the I mean, the best, because a lot of what, when you talk to people there's these federal roadblocks, things or that, and they're seen as like these big, I mean, that's a stop sign, and you're describing a way of working. Just, I mean, this is what it is. We're not gonna, any reforms we do want, they're gonna be most effective if they're really, really, really targeted and small. Like a big full on reform is, it's just not something we can wait on. You can maybe
Right.
find these areas that, like, well, we can really kind of push here, like the ombudsman, some of these ideas that could help. But in the meantime, instead of waiting on that reform right now, there's nothing
Yeah,
stopping
let's
this except coordinating people to do it.
right. Yeah. Yeah, there's no reason we can't rebuild local and regional food. I mean, we just gotta get after it.
Yeah. So we need people to kind of bite the bullet and decide to do this. And so it sounds like coordinating with other producers around around, a slaughter plant would be a great thing, making sure that you can support the numbers. And then if you're, you have your animals, they've been slaughtered, and then thinking about whether you want to bring them back and process them at your place, or whether you want to hire that out too to another butcher shop. But that's sort of the path, because like you said earlier, and I think it's right, like the direct marketing path is the path. So we've got to build direct market to our consumers. Right now we run through this bottleneck of processing. And so this is how you expand that bottleneck essentially.
Right, and some of those people, instead of their, micro processing in their retail shop being at the farm, some of those people, would just be better off to just build that in the city, where their actual retail location's gonna be. Cut the carcasses right up there, that fits right in with what Mike always talks about, and that fits in exactly with what Mike does. Mike slaughters at the farm and cuts them up where his actual customer
Hmm.
base is. All of us, I think we can get as big of a percentage of people in rural America that would actually buy our product as in the city. But the problem is there just aren't very many people out here in rural America. So the reality is we have to go to where the people are. And, we either have to go to where the people are with the carcass or with the packaged product. And in some situations, people would be better off going with the carcass. In some situations, people would be better off going with the packaged product.
Yeah, and I think that, it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily, like, when you talk about going to the city, like, I don't believe you probably need to go to, St. Louis or Chicago. Like, there's a lot of mid-sized small cities even that I think would be perfectly
Oh yeah,
viable, for something like this. You have a town of
right.
30 or 50,000 people that can support, if you can get a butcher shop in there, and people get their meat there.
If if we did the math, we sell more per capita in Fort Wayne, Indiana, than any other city. It's actually a really good town for us. It's not our biggest town by far, but we definitely sell more per person in Fort Wayne than we do in Chicago, Indianapolis, Detroit,
Nice.
anywhere. So I mean, there's definitely markets in the smaller cities. So like I said, I think there's I think there's close to as many percentage of people that will buy directly from farmers just about anywhere. Like I said, I think the challenge in rural America is there just aren't very many people. So if, even if you got 20% of the people to buy your product, you outgrow that 20% really fast because there just aren't enough people.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. I like that idea. It's constructive. It seems like there's, a way to go forward right now, which I think that's exciting
Yeah.
because we need that. We need a way to go forward right now. We need to kind of be able to circumvent this sort of monopoly monstrosity that's captured so much of how we do things now. Switching gears a little bit because I also wanted to hear, it's a totally separate topic, but you're a big booster for this solar grazing and for sheep, and I'm always interested in ruminants because I think ruminants are miraculous and the best thing for the land that there is. And so just I wonder if you want to just talk about your experience with solar grazing and with sheep.
Yeah, sure. Our whole family spent New Year's 2019 down at White Oaks Pasture.
Yeah.
Been a good friend of Will Harris for quite some while, and he was just getting into this at the time. A light bulb went off in my head. He took us out to one of the solar sites that they were going to graze, and I'm like, man, this is just a really cool idea because I think we're all well aware that access to land for those of us that want to scale regenerative ag and scale rotational grazing, being able to afford or even to being able to find land is a huge, huge problem. So that was the thought in our head was, hey, if we had some sheep and we could negotiate a contract with a solar company, get paid to control the vegetation, we'd get to try rotational grazing at a much larger scale. And we quit pastured chickens after the 2020 season. Being a restaurant supplier at the beginning of COVID was just way too stressful. It all worked out okay, but it was just way too stressful. And my son and I, we got a small flock of Katahdin Dorper crosses, and we really like them. Seasonal, grass-based operations, so they lamb in late spring, early summer. The lambs, we don't direct market the lambs. The market is good enough that we don't have to. The lambs are gone before the weather gets bad. We sell them around that Thanksgiving time. Never seen any grain. They do really good on the going to the auction because the grass is really good. Net energy, crude protein levels high enough that you can get a decent finish on lamb. I don't think you could do that same thing with cattle to get grass-fed cattle to fit into the conventional market, but you can definitely get grass-fed lambs to fit into the conventional market and get right at the top of the
I've
market.
wondered before if I don't know, but I'm wondering before if like you use like a small breed, like a Dexter, because we have some Dexters. Part of our herd is Dexter. I wonder
Yeah.
if a smaller breed could do some of the solar grazing.
There's some people, Grays out in Virginia have been working on trying to get some cattle, and I think there'll be some people that do some stuff with cattle. And if you look at, there's a few of the companies that are making some cattle friendly solar sites around the world. But my argument has always been that I think sheep are the ideal grazers for solar because they don't harm the equipment. They fit in what is the best available technology in solar right now because a lot of these cattle friendly sites, they're putting the panels up in the air and they're not making them so they tilt. And you give up 17 to 30% energy
Yeah.
production by not having the panels track the sun. And the real thing that they're producing on these sites is electricity from a dollars
Yeah.
and cents standpoint. We're really providing the vegetation service, and there's no cattle on the planet that can afford the lost in electrical because it could be $1,500 to $2,000 per acre lost in revenue by not having these sites
So with
track.
with
And
with sheep,
before it costs more.
with sheep, essentially, you're saying like, yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They're kind of perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. And then the challenge becomes, as well as I do, there's not really a lot of scaled pasture-based sheep operations this side of the Mississippi. So we really have to regrow the whole sheep industry to be able to do this because, you graze 1,000 acres of utility scale solar on what was prime farmland. And man, you need 2,000 to 3,000 ewes. You still have to mow during spring flush if you have 2,000 to 3,000 ewes. And we're not to that level of ewes yet. We're getting closer all the time. I think we'll make it by year after this season. But there's not really you get outside of Texas, there's not guys with flocks that's 2,000 to 3,000 ewes doing daily moves. It's a learning curve, but it's a fun
Nice.
learning curve.
When do you overwinter them, or how do you overwinter them?
We bring them back home to overwinter. If anybody would follow my son on Instagram, he puts some and LinkedIn for that matter. We overwinter them on stockpiled pasture here at the farm with the sheep gone during the grazing season and just the pigs and the poultry running out across the land. We're able to stockpile. We have about 250 acres of pasture here at the farms. Last year, we fed ewes for 10 days, fed hay for 10 days. I think
Nice.
we'll feed more this year. We were really dry coming into fall. And then we got more ewes now than what we had before. So we'll probably feed hay for a little bit longer. But I think long term, we need to build some relationships with some of the local farmers because I think that we need to put some cover crops onto some corn stalks. I think within ground that we can see from where we're at, I think we could easily overwinter 10,000 on stalks with cover crops plus what grass we have, without, a minimal or almost no hay system, because if you produce lambs seasonally, lamb those things, first to middle of May lambing season, the only thing we have now is dry ewes. Their feed requirement is literally the lowest that it possibly can be when our grass is not growing. By the time, the end of their gestation, the grass has started back up again. They're in good condition when they're lambing. And they lamb on the best grass of the year. By the time that they're weaned, the grass is slowing down. The grass gets that nice little, vegetative flush again there in the fall to finish the lambs. The lambs go to town before the grass quits. We've only got dry ewes again. The system is
Boy, that does
actually
sound
really, really
smooth.
cool.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then right now
Yeah,
you're growing,
yeah.
so you're reserving a certain percentage of your
Yeah,
lambs to become your breeders.
yeah, and we're fortunate the vegetation fees that you get paid are actually good enough that from a cash flow standpoint, we're able to keep just about every female lamb that we can. So we're growing just as fast as you can. And sheep numbers can grow
Yeah.
quick because you can add 50% every year. When you start adding 50% on when you got 1,200 used, the numbers start to get pretty big. It's kind of really encouraging. It's really
Yeah,
fun.
that is fun. That's neat. That's really neat. So yeah, I like.
And it reminds me a lot, Nate, of the beginning of the whole farm to table movement. The amount of excitement and buzz from the companies, because just a couple years ago, none of the solar developers even knew anything about sheep and grazing. And, so that kind of reminds me of the late 90s with, none of the chefs knew about dealing with farmers. But, solar grazing, our value proposition is so different than farm to table. We literally do a better job and we do it at a slightly lower price than what the mechanical mowing. We don't have anything in the farm to table movement, but what, it's the you're trying to sell something that's 2, 3, 4 times higher price. We're trying to sell something that's lower cost and does a better job. That,
Now, do you
it's
just rotate? Do
exciting.
you use just like polywire?
Yep, we do 2 polywire on battery-powered, Cyclops, so we run, 12-joule chargers, and, it's big enough acreage that we got polywire and reels and posts in by the pallet, so we'd never played at this level of game before. It's cool to see pallets full of polywire, pallets full of reels
Two
show up
wires
at the
for sheep
farm.
is what you use, so you don't
2
mess with
wires,
any of
we
that
use 2
netting
wires.
crap.
Now we have some nets around here, but no, we don't have to put up nets every day. My son manages the sheep and he's a grazing wizard, but he's really good about that, and we put those 2 wires on the same reel. So you run them out, put a little loop in the end so that it stays tight and run it back. We wind up and pull out the 2 poly wires at one time, but convinced that if you put a really, really big charger on a clean polywire fence, you can keep sheep in. And especially we've got enough acres that we're not really pushing them that
They don't
terribly
want to get
hard to
out.
the point
They're yeah.
they don't want to get out, and don't get me wrong, they're sheep. If you think that you're never going to have a sheep get out, you probably shouldn't
Well,
raise sheep.
I'm sure the babies get out, but that doesn't really matter, right?
Well, the
Yeah,
babies get
they
out, but
come back
that,
to
that
mama
doesn't really
as
matter.
long as the moms. Now, what do you pull? Do you have a big water tank? What do you do for water?
Yeah, we've got a water tank that we pull. We actually have, I don't know, it's probably 5 or 6 miles of water pipe laying along the fence, but we still pull a water tank most of the time. And that's a long story because the well pumps weren't exactly what we ended up wanting for the well pumps, to the point we have to power them with a bigger generator than what we needed. But the sheep don't really drink a lot of water unless it's really, really brutally hot.
So water
So,
tank usually
and they
takes
actually
care of it.
drink, yeah, yeah. They drink way less water at the solar site than what they do at home. It's almost like they have 30% of the ground is that they can be
Yeah.
under shade whenever they want. It's at the, I laugh because, and I'm sure I'm biased and I'll tell people I'm biased, but I laugh when everybody tells me you can't raise sheep on solar sites and all of the panels will mess with them and all this stuff. We raise the best sheep that we've ever raised on solar site. We have plenty of grass, really, really high clover pasture, very, very vegetative. It actually stays more vegetative at the solar site than what it does at home because it's
Well, that's the
shaded.
thing.
And,
That's the
people,
thing about that I think a lot of people don't understand is that shade is so good for that's why silvopasture is great.
oh, yeah,
Anywhere in our pastures,
right.
I mow around. I'm trying to save and plant trees because everywhere there's trees, the grass is just so much better. You get a big open pasture with no grass, it's going to get sunburnt. It doesn't grow as well. You have trees dotted throughout there. The best grass is always around the edges of the trees. You go out a little bit, it's beautiful stuff.
Right. And we have such a high percentage of clover that, one of our concerns, we have to be careful on the bloat risk, which sheep are better than cattle. But we have to be careful that we don't let them get hungry. We have to be careful that we don't move them too early in the day. But, the plus side of that is we just got such nutritious pasture and those things just grow so fast. We had one trailer load of lambs that were not born by the middle of May that we sold before Thanksgiving that were averaged over 120 pounds.
You know,
And we couldn't do that at home.
makes me wonder. I mean, and you sell them just into the market, into the commodity land market. I mean, imagine too if you were direct marketing, building. I mean, boy, that is a
Oh, yeah.
profitable proposition we're talking about here.
Yeah, if we were able to stack that, because we can stack vegetation fees on a scaled pasture sheep operation. And then if we were someday able to stack, processing with local food on top of that, it would even be a more valuable venture. But at the moment, I'm not sure if you're aware, the sheep market in the U.S. is kind of like it's really two distinct lamb markets. You've got the Eastern ethnic market, and they really don't care for a lamb over 80 pounds. And then you've got the fat lamb market, which is just as concentrated, if not more, than the pork and the
Hmm.
beef industry. And so you take a lamb past 80 pounds, you're at the mercy of what those big packers will pay, and you're at the mercy of what the current rate of the dollar is and how much Australia and New Zealand wants
Mm.
to ship in lamb because 70% of the lamb that is sold in the US is imported lamb. And almost all of that plays into the cuts, the legs, the roast, the racks, and almost none of it that imported fits into the ethnic lamb trade, the halal and the kosher and the Latino, because those guys want fresh lambs at a little slaughter plant. And the structure of the lamb industry is so, so different than the
Hmm.
structure of pork and beef and chicken because the little plants that actually slaughter sheep and goats actually buy all of their animals. Where, as well as I do, the little plants that are left that slaughter pigs or beef, they're almost all processing them for farmers that are taking it somewhere else. So we actually have a really competitive market and a very functional market for those Eastern ethnic lambs and goats. And we're right in the correct corridor. So if you're between Chicago, Detroit, New York, New Jersey, that's where most of those lambs are slaughtered and sold. And so we have a really, really hot live market for lamb if you're producing the right lamb and you keep it in that 80 to 90 pounds or less.
The
And
carcass is
because
80 or
of
90
that,
pounds.
no, the live
Okay.
weight is 80 to 90 pounds. So, you go past that, you're in a no man's land that maybe it'll be good, maybe it won't. And the lamb market is highly, highly seasonal. Lamb is consumed on a few holidays, Easter the biggest, but some of the Muslim holidays. So the lamb market will go up and down. And so, our time that we produce for also fits that whole market because the market starts up around that Thanksgiving time and continues to go up till Easter and then crashes, and especially crashes when all of the lambs come off from the range down in East and West Texas. So you don't want a lamb that is going to be sold in the summer. You want pasture well enough that you can take them into early winter when the market is good. And so, it all just the whole thing, my son really, really good about getting all of that to just fit together. But, if we took those small lambs, and lambs will only yield about 50%. So we only get a 40-pound carcass, and then you add our slaughter and processing on top of it. We just haven't figured out a means yet in which we can get a price direct marketing them that's really better than us just raising more lambs and taking them to the
Well,
auction.
that's
We're
yeah.
still
Well,
working on it,
that's
but I
that's
think
a
that's
good
a good
yeah,
problem
that's
to
what I was
have.
about to say. That's all right. I mean, that's a lot less effort, and yeah, if you can sell to a good market, I mean, I think ultimately that's really I think what most farmers want. Just let me grow the stuff and sell it to a good market. But like the whole direct market is the thing that we're having to build out just because the market's gone.
Right, right. I that's what I told people in Washington D.C., and they always look at me funny. But when I was up in Washington D.C. last month, I told them, if they actually enforced the Packer and Stockyards Act, which ironically is the regulations right before the meat and poultry regulations. So 9 CFR 200 is the Packer and Stockyards, 9 CFR 300 is the meat and poultry regulation. But if USDA, the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, if they'd enforced the Packer and Stockyards Act, the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, I wouldn't be a processor. I was completely fine and happy raising live pigs and selling live pigs. We're a processor out of necessity. And then I'd actually go further and say, that's probably not the reason to become a processor. If you're going to get into a business, and I know it's semantics, but if you're going to get into a business, you really need to get into a business to solve your customer's problem, not to solve your problem. And we really got into a business to solve our problem. And, you have to figure out a means to solve a customer's problem if you want a successful business long term. And I think that's why direct to individuals works, because there's a large amount of people out there that want to know how their food's raised, how it's processed, something that's healthier and better for them, better for their family, better for the environment, better for the animals. And I know there's a lot of people that go through institutions and all that, but you end up with one corporate buyer that says, hey, we can get this product way cheaper over here that's the same thing. And,
Yeah.
it's hard to beat.
Yeah, I refer people to listen to the interview with Mike Callicrate. We described that process real thoroughly. So to wrap it up, so what we've got here, because I think we're getting on a couple hours. What we described, I wanted to reiterate because I love it. Sort of this idea of a centralized facility that did the bare minimal slaughter at a rigorously inspected, expensively inspected site, and then distribute that back to the farm or a retail shop or wherever, and kind of continue to build that out, build local and regional capacity out. And then meanwhile, we also just need to keep beating that brick wall of the Packers and Stockyards Act and get the USDA to help us out with, because eventually we can build these local and regional hubs out, and those, we did it 50 years ago. There's no reason we can't distribute our meat locally. That's a thing that can be done. It's not like an impossible weird thing. We just have to build it out. We start to build that out, then we really are going to need to cut these big players down to size. We'll probably need some help with that, but we'll keep banging on that drum while we're building this out, and that's sort of how we get there.
Yep.
Nice. Well, Greg, it's been great. I want to hear, what's your son's Instagram so people can come look and see your sheep.
Evan Gunthorp, but I'm not sure what his Instagram is, but
I bet we can find that out and link it in the show notes if
I bet you can
people
find
want to
that.
check out that solar grazing, and that's always fun to see those things. Good inspiration. I'm going to look into this now, see where solar fields are coming in my area, and look into this, because you just make it sound like I don't graze sheep now, but I've wanted to start. So that's an interesting thing to.
I think it's a huge opportunity because, like I said, I think one of the biggest challenges facing scaling regenerative grazing is that access and affordability to
Mhm.
land, and I think solar grazing
Yeah.
fixes that. And so that's really, really
Yeah,
encouraging to me.
you're getting paid instead of paying for the land.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that changes
Right.
the math a whole lot.
That changes the math a lot. Yeah, it lets you cash flow the whole growth and expansion into it.
Nice.
Where, you'd be literally shoestring in it. There'd be no way that we
Yeah.
could afford 1,000-acre sheep operation. Just not
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. It's really, and that's sort of, I mean, I keep going because this is a great conversation, but I think that's what you see in ag now. People, you either do it the way that, like, yeah, you ended up with the land and you kind of won, 30 years ago, and you're kind of, anybody else who's doing it though has been through a hell of a lot of hardship to hang on and to do it. And that's not real. I mean, that's just not realistic to think that we're going to change the entire food system by some people just holding on by the skin of their teeth and living a very stressful life to try to make it work. Like, that's not how it should be. It has to be something that, people can reasonably do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It shouldn't be a 20-hour a day commitment, 365 days a year, and still hoping that there's some money left in
Yeah,
the
and still
checkbook.
maybe. It's still, even after that, it's still maybe. But, um, well, Greg, thank you very much. I appreciate this conversation. And anything else you want to add or that I didn't remember to ask about?
I'll suggest that your listeners come agitate me a little bit on Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. I'm pretty professional on Facebook. I'm not always on Twitter, but I think that's kind of the nature of its beast, and that's
That's
kind
what
of
makes
fun. So
Twitter. That's what makes
yeah,
Twitter fun for sure.
yeah, yeah. We should continue the conversation
Absolutely.
there.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, look forward to talking to you in the future.
Yeah, thanks.